something has changed. You feel it. Everyone feels it. The years are shorter than they used to be. The weeks evaporate before you notice they have begun. You look up from your phone, and an hour has vanished. You blink, and your children are grown. You remember childhood summers that lasted forever long, slow, syrup-thick afternoons in which a single day contained more experience than an entire month contains now. And you wonder, is something happening to time? Is time itself accelerating? Or is something happening to you, something that makes the same 24 hours feel like 12, the same 12 months feel like 6, the same decade feel like a blur of indistinguishable days that you cannot remember because they were over before they registered? You are not imagining this. The perception that time is accelerating is one of the most universal, most consistent, and most thoroughly documented experiences in human psychology. It has been reported across every culture, every age group, every historical period, and every socio-economic class. It intensifies with age, it intensifies with routine, and it has intensified dramatically since 2020. Since the pandemic locked billions of people into a monotonous, screen-dominated, novelty-deprived existence that the neuroscience of time perception predicts would produce exactly the experience that everyone is reporting. The feeling that time is slipping through your fingers faster than you can hold it, but the acceleration you feel is not happening to time. Time, as far as physics can tell, is ticking at the same rate it has always ticked. The clocks are not running faster, the Earth is not spinning faster. The cesium atoms in the atomic clocks at the National Institute of Standards and Technology are oscillating at the same 9,192,631,770 cycles per second that they have always oscillated at. The objective time is unchanged. What has changed is the way your brain processes time. And understanding how the brain constructs the experience of time is essential to understanding why that experience is accelerating and what, if anything, can be done about it. The neuroscience of time perception begins with a counterintuitive discovery. The brain has no clock. Unlike vision, which has a retina, or hearing, which has a cochlea, the perception of time has no dedicated sensory organ and no dedicated brain region. The brain does not measure time directly. It constructs the experience of time from indirect cues, from the density of memories formed, the intensity of attention paid, the novelty of experiences encountered, and the neurochemical state of the systems that process these cues. Time perception is not a measurement. It is a construction, and like all constructions, it can be distorted, manipulated, and systematically biased by the conditions under which it operates. The psychologist William James identified the fundamental principle of time construction in 1890, and it remains the foundation of the field. An empty interval seems long in passing but short in retrospect. A full interval seems short in passing but long in retrospect. This is the paradox of subjective time. When you are bored, when nothing is happening, when the minutes crawl by in excruciating slowness, the time feels long in the moment, but short when you look back. When you are engaged, when you are absorbed in a fascinating conversation, a challenging project, a novel experience, the time feels short in the moment, but long when you look back. The remembered duration is the inverse of the experienced duration. James's paradox has been confirmed by over a century of subsequent research. The psychologist Robert Ornstein in the 1960s demonstrated experimentally that subjects estimate the duration of a stimulus as longer when the stimulus contains more information, more complexity, more variety, more distinguishable events. A 5-minute recording of varied, complex sounds is judged as longer than a 5-minute recording of a single, repeated tone, even though the clock time is identical. The brain uses the informational content of an interval as a proxy for its duration. More information means more time. less information means less time. The neuroscientist David Eagleman at Baylor College of Medicine extended this research into the domain of fear and danger. Eagleman showed that time appears to slow down during frightening experiences during car accidents, falls, near-death events, not because the brain's clock is actually running faster, but because the amygdala, activated by fear, instructs the hippocampus to encode memories at a much higher density than normal. The brain is writing more data per second, producing more memories per unit of clock time, and the retrospective estimate of duration is proportionally longer. The near-death experience that lasted an eternity lasted the same number of seconds on the clock, but the brain wrote 10 times more data during those seconds than it normally writes, and the retrospective experience is 10 times longer. This has a direct implication for the acceleration of time. If the brain writes less data per second, the retrospective experience will be proportionally shorter, and the conditions of modern life, routine, repetition, digital distraction, and the absence of genuine novelty are conditions that minimize the data rate of the brain's memory system, producing the subjective experience of time compression that everyone is reporting. The resolution of this paradox lies in the brain's memory system. The brain estimates the duration of a past interval by counting the number of distinct memories it formed during that interval. Many memories means a long interval. Few memories means a short interval. And the number of memories formed is determined not by the clock time that elapsed, but by the number of novel, emotionally significant, attention-demanding events that occurred during the interval. A childhood summer is remembered as lasting forever because, for a child, everything is novel. Every day brings new experiences, new discoveries, new emotional peaks and valleys that the brain encodes as distinct, vivid, temporally tagged memories. A single summer day at the beach contains the first time you felt the cold shock of ocean water on your skin, the first time you saw a crab, the first time you built a sandcastle, the first time you tasted salt on your lips after swimming. Each of these is a novel event that the brain encodes as a separate memory, and the accumulation of these memories produces, in retrospect, the sensation of a vast, slowly unfolding stretch of time. The neuroscientist Moshe Bar at Harvard Medical School has documented the neural mechanism behind this childhood temporal richness. Bar's research shows that the brain's prediction system, the system that constantly generates predictions about what will happen next, based on past experience, is underdeveloped in children and highly developed in adults. The child's brain cannot predict what will happen next, because it lacks the experience base from which predictions are generated. Every experience is therefore surprising, attention-demanding, and memory-producing. The adult's brain, by contrast, predicts almost everything correctly. The commute, the meeting, the lunch, the evening routine, all are predicted accurately, and the brain, having confirmed its predictions, does not bother to encode the experience as a new memory. The predicted experience is compressed to nothing. Only the unpredicted, the novel, the surprising, the emotionally significant is encoded. This means that the acceleration of time is, in a precise neurological sense, the consequence of the brain becoming too good at predicting. The brain's prediction machine improves with every year of experience, and as it improves, it compresses more and more of each day into the predicted and confirmed category that produces no memories. The brain is optimizing for efficiency at the cost of temporal richness. It is trading the vivid, slow, memory-dense experience of the child's world for the efficient, fast, memory-sparse experience of the adult's world. The acceleration is not a bug in the system, it is a feature that the digital environment has exploited and amplified to an unprecedented degree. An adult year, by contrast, is remembered as a blur because the novelty has vanished. You wake up, you check your phone, you commute, you work, you eat the same lunch at the same desk, you commute home, you watch a screen, you sleep, The days are identical. The brain does not encode identical days as separate memories, it compresses them. The way a video codec compresses identical frames into a single instruction. Repeat. A year of repeated days produces the same number of distinct memories as a few weeks of novel experiences. And the brain, counting memories to estimate duration, concludes that the year was short. The year was not short. You were not paying attention. The French philosopher Paul Janet formalized this principle in 1877 with what is now called Janet's proportional theory. Janet proposed that the subjective length of a time interval is proportional to the fraction of total life experience it represents. For a 10-year-old, 1 year is 10% of everything they have ever experienced. For a 50-year-old, 1 year is 2%. The same objective duration, 365 days, 8,760 hours, 525,600 minutes, feels 5 times shorter to the 50-year-old than to the 10-year-old because it constitutes a smaller proportion of their accumulated experience. Janet's theory produces a specific, testable prediction. The subjective speed of time should increase logarithmically with age. The first year of life should feel as long as all subsequent years combined. The first decade should feel as long as the remaining decades. And the midpoint of subjective life, the point at which half of your subjective time has elapsed, should occur not at the midpoint of your chronological life, but much earlier. If you live to 80, the midpoint of your subjective life occurs at approximately age 20. By your 20th birthday, you have already experienced half of your subjective life. The remaining 60 years will feel, subjectively, like the first 20. This prediction matches the phenomenology that almost everyone reports. Childhood felt endless, adolescence felt long, and adulthood has been a blur. The mathematical model and the subjective experience agree. Time is not accelerating in the physical sense. It is compressing in the subjective sense, because the brain's memory system encodes less and less per unit of clock time as the proportion of novel experience decreases. The psychologist Claudia Hammond, in her book Time Warped, documented an additional factor that Janet's theory does not capture: the role of emotion in time perception. Emotionally intense experiences are remembered as longer than emotionally neutral experiences, regardless of their novelty. A deeply moving conversation, a moment of profound grief, a peak experience of joy or awe, each of these produces a dense, vivid, emotionally tagged memory that the brain counts as a long interval. The emotional flatness of routine life, the grey, effectively neutral, emotionally unremarkable character of most adult days, contributes to time compression not only through the absence of novelty, but through the absence of emotional intensity. Janet's theory is elegant but incomplete. It explains why time accelerates with age, but not why it has accelerated so dramatically since 2020. A 50-year-old in 1990 experienced the same proportional effect as a 50-year-old in 2024. But the 50-year-old in 2024 reports a more extreme acceleration than the 50-year-old in 1990. Something beyond proportional aging is at work. The neurotransmitter dopamine provides a critical piece of the puzzle. Dopamine is not merely the pleasure chemical that popular science describes. It is the brain's novelty detector and time-stamping system. When you encounter something new, a new face, a new taste, a new idea, a new environment, the dopaminergic neurons in the ventral tegmental area fire, producing a burst of dopamine that serves two functions. It signals reward, motivating you to pursue the novel stimulus, and it signals temporal novelty, instructing the hippocampus to encode a new memory with a fresh timestamp. More dopamine means more timestamps. More timestamps means more memories. More memories means a subjectively longer duration. Dopamine levels decline with age approximately 10% per decade after the age of 20. This decline is part of the reason that time accelerates with age. Fewer dopamine bursts means fewer timestamps, fewer memories, and a subjectively shorter duration for each passing year. But the decline is gradual and predictable. It does not explain the sudden, dramatic acceleration that people have reported since the pandemic. The neuroscientist Warren Meck at Duke University has documented the role of dopamine in the brain's internal clock with exceptional precision. Meck's research shows that dopamine modulates the speed of the brain's pacemaker, the neural oscillator that provides the raw timing signal from which the brain constructs its experience of duration. When dopamine levels are high, the pacemaker runs faster, producing more ticks per unit of clock time and creating the subjective experience of time slowing down. When dopamine levels are low, the pacemaker runs slower, producing fewer ticks per unit of clock time and creating the subjective experience of time speeding up. This means that the chronic dopamine depletion of modern life caused by aging, by the dopaminergic desensitization that chronic social media use produces, by the stress-related suppression of dopamine that the pandemic and the attention economy have imposed, is not merely reducing the number of temporal landmarks. It is literally slowing the brain's internal clock, producing fewer ticks per second and creating the physiological basis for the subjective experience that time is moving faster. The experience is not an illusion in the trivial sense. It is a neurochemically mediated change in the brain's timing mechanism, a real change in the way the brain processes temporal information, caused by real changes in the neurochemical environment of the dopaminergic system. The pandemic explanation requires a different mechanism, the collapse of temporal landmarks. The psychologist Dan Zake has shown that the brain uses temporal landmarks, distinctive, memorable events that break the flow of routine, to segment time into manageable chunks. Birthdays, holidays, vacations, social gatherings, and novel experiences serve as landmarks that the brain uses to organize its temporal map. Without these landmarks, time becomes an undifferentiated stream that the brain cannot segment, cannot organize, and cannot remember as a sequence of distinct intervals. The result is the experience of time compression, the feeling that weeks, months, and years have passed without leaving any trace in the memory. The pandemic destroyed temporal landmarks with unprecedented thoroughness. Lockdowns eliminated social gatherings. Travel restrictions eliminated vacations. Remote work eliminated the physical transitions, the commute, the office, the lunchtime walk that normally segment the workday into distinct episodes. Mask mandates eliminated the facial expressions that the brain uses to encode social memories. And the monotony of lockdown life, the same room, the same screen, the same routine, day after day, after week after month, produced a temporal desert, a vast expanse of undifferentiated time that the brain compressed into a handful of vague, indistinguishable memories. The result was what psychologists have called the pandemic time warp, a widespread, well-documented distortion of time perception in which 2020, 2021, and 2022 feel simultaneously endless in the moment and vanished in retrospect. The days were long because they were boring. The years were short because they were identical. And the temporal landmarks that would normally have allowed the brain to segment and remember the passage of time were absent, producing a hole in the temporal map that the brain cannot fill. But the pandemic was not the beginning of the acceleration. It was the acute intensification of a chronic condition that has been developing for decades. The chronic condition is the digital attention economy, the system of platforms, algorithms, and interfaces that has progressively captured, fragmented, and monetized human attention since the introduction of the smartphone in 2007. The attention economy attacks time perception through three mechanisms. First, it fragments attention. The average smartphone user checks their phone 96 times per day, approximately once every 10 minutes during waking hours. Each check interrupts whatever the user was doing, fragmenting their attention into tiny, discontinuous episodes that are too short and too shallow to produce the kind of deep, focused, novel processing that the brain requires to generate temporal landmarks. The user is busy all day but has nothing to remember at the end of it, because the attention was never sustained long enough to produce a memorable experience. Second, it replaces novelty with pseudo-novelty. Social media feeds are algorithmically optimized to produce a stream of content that feels new posts, new images, new videos, new outrage, new entertainment, but that is, at a deeper level, structurally identical from moment to moment. The format is the same, the emotional register is the same, the cognitive depth is the same. The brain receives a superficial novelty signal that triggers a microburst of dopamine, but the experience is not genuinely novel in the way that a real-world encounter, a new friendship, or a visit to an unfamiliar place is novel. The dopamine burst is too small to produce a full-time stamp. The memory is too shallow to serve as a temporal landmark. And the result is a paradox. The user consumes vast quantities of apparently novel content, but forms no lasting memories of it, producing the experience of time compression even during periods of intense digital activity. Third, it displaces the experiences that would naturally slow time down. Every minute spent scrolling is a minute not spent in a face-to-face conversation, a walk in nature, a creative project, a physical adventure, or any other genuinely novel, attention-demanding, memory-producing experience. The attention economy does not merely fail to produce temporal landmarks, it actively displaces the activities that would produce them, replacing rich, embodied, multisensory experiences with thin, disembodied, visually monotonous screen interactions that the brain compresses to nothing. The cumulative effect of these three mechanisms is devastating. The digital attention economy has produced a civilization of people who are constantly stimulated but rarely engaged, continuously entertained but never absorbed, perpetually busy but experientially empty. The result is an epidemic of time compression that is distinct from the normal aging-related acceleration. It affects young people as severely as old people. It has intensified dramatically since the smartphone era began, and it produces a specific quality of temporal experience that the psychologist Du Dreismer has called remembered emptiness. The retrospective awareness that a period of time has passed, but that it contained nothing worth remembering. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han, in his book The Burnout Society, describes the modern condition as one of exhaustion without fulfillment, a state in which the individual is perpetually active, perpetually producing, perpetually consuming, but perpetually empty. The emptiness is temporal as well as existential. The time passes, but it leaves no trace. The days are full of activity but empty of experience, and the sensation of time acceleration is, in Han's framework, the temporal signature of a life that is quantitatively full but qualitatively void. The neuroscientist Adam Ghazali at UCSF has documented the cognitive consequences of chronic attention fragmentation. His research shows that multitasking, the simultaneous management of multiple information streams that the digital environment demands, degrades memory encoding, reduces the depth of information processing, and impairs the hippocampal mechanisms that produce the temporal landmarks on which the brain's time map depends. The multitasking brain is not processing more, it is processing less, because the fragmented attention prevents the deep encoding that produces durable memories. The brain is drowning in information but starving for experience. The contemplative traditions recognize the relationship between attention and time long before the neuroscience confirmed it. In Buddhism, the concept of sati mindfulness, present moment awareness, is the antidote to what the tradition calls the monkey mind, the restless, scattered, constantly jumping attention that flits from thought to thought without settling on anything. The monkey mind is the Buddhist description of the fragmented attention that the digital economy exploits and amplifies. And the consequence of the monkey mind, in the Buddhist analysis, is dukkha suffering, which includes the specific suffering of time compression, the feeling that life is slipping away, that the days are empty, that the years are vanishing without trace. The Buddhist prescription is mindfulness, the sustained, non-reactive, fully engaged attention to the present moment that produces exactly the temporal landmarks that the fragmented mind cannot generate. The mindfulness practitioner does not need a vacation in Bali to slow time down. They can slow time down while washing dishes, because they are fully present to the experience of washing dishes, the temperature of the water, the texture of the soap, the weight of the plate, the sound of the running water. Each of these sensory details is a novel datum that the fully attentive brain encodes as a distinct experience, producing the temporal landmarks that the distracted brain cannot create. The mindfulness practitioner's time is slower, not because their clock ticks differently, but because their brain produces more temporal landmarks per unit of clock time. In Christianity, the distinction between chronos and kairos, two Greek words for time, both used in the New Testament, captures the same insight. Chronos is clock time, the sequential, measurable, uniform flow of seconds, minutes, and hours that the cesium atoms count. Kairos is qualitative time, the right time, the appointed time, the moment of significance that breaks the flow of chronos and produces an experience of depth, meaning, and presence that chronos alone cannot provide. When Jesus says, "The time is fulfilled" in Mark 1:15, he uses kairos, not chronos. The fulfilled time is not a quantity of seconds. It is a quality of attention, a moment in which the ordinary flow of clock time is interrupted by something of such significance that it rewrites the temporal map entirely. The Christian contemplative tradition's emphasis on liturgical time, the rhythm of daily prayers, weekly Sabbaths, seasonal feasts, and annual cycles that structure the Christian year, is a technology for generating kairos within chronos. Each liturgical event is a temporal landmark, a distinctive, memorable, communally shared experience that breaks the monotony of routine and provides the brain with the kind of novel, emotionally significant, attention-demanding input that it needs to produce a rich temporal map. The person who observes the liturgical year has 52 Sundays, each with its own scripture readings and its own liturgical colour. They have Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Holy Week, Easter, Pentecost, a calendar of distinctive temporal landmarks that segments the year into memorable chunks and prevents the time compression that a landmark-free year would produce. The Desert Fathers of 4th century Egypt, who withdrew from urban society into the solitude of the desert, reported an experience that is the exact inverse of modern time compression. In the desert, stripped of routine entertainment, social stimulation, and the distractions of city life, the monks found that time slowed to an almost unbearable crawl. The desert literature is full of references to the struggle with acedia, the noonday demon, the spiritual torpor that the monks experienced during the long, empty hours of the desert afternoon. But the monks who persevered through the acedia discovered something extraordinary on the other side. A quality of temporal experience that they described as the eternal present, a state in which the passage of time ceased to be experienced as loss and became instead a continuous, unfolding revelation of the divine presence in each moment. The monks achieved this not by filling the time with activity, but by emptying the attention of distraction. They did not need more stimulation, they needed less. The desert was the antidote to the monkey mind, the stripping away of every external stimulus that the attention could latch onto, until the attention was forced to rest in the present moment, and the present moment revealed itself as infinite. The monk's practice is the historical prototype of every mindfulness-based intervention that contemporary psychology has developed to address the time compression of the digital age, and it is, in its depth and its radicality, far more powerful than any of them. In Islam, the concept of barakah, divine blessing, abundance, the quality of more than enough that God places in time, in provision, and in experience is directly relevant to the perception of time. The Prophet Muhammad taught that the barakah of time would be removed as the Day of Judgment approaches. The days would pass more quickly, the years would feel shorter, and the people would feel that time is being compressed. This hadith, narrated in multiple collections, is one of the most frequently cited prophecies in contemporary Islamic discourse because the experience it describes matches the experience that billions of people are reporting. Time feels faster, the years feel shorter, and the sense of temporal abundance has been replaced by a sense of temporal scarcity. The concept of barakah in time is not merely a theological abstraction. It is a practical, experiential reality that Muslim practitioners describe with specificity. The early morning hours before dawn, the time of the tahajjud prayer. The night vigil are described as having especially rich barakah. Practitioners who wake for tahajjud consistently report that the pre-dawn hours feel longer, more spacious, and more productive than the same number of hours during the daytime. The Islamic tradition's emphasis on the pre-dawn prayer is, in the neuroscience framework, the cultivation of a temporal practice during the circadian window, when the brain is most receptive to deep processing and most capable of producing the temporal landmarks that create the experience of temporal abundance. The Islamic practice of Ramadan, the month of fasting from dawn to sunset, is a powerful temporal intervention. Fasting disrupts the body's routine, breaks the monotonous cycle of eating and drinking that structures the ordinary day, and forces a reorganization of the daily schedule around the iftar and suhoor meals that become, for the fasting person, the most emotionally significant and socially rich events of the day. Ramadan is temporally distinctive. It feels different from every other month. It produces different routines, different emotions, different social interactions, and different memories. And the consistent report of Muslims who observe Ramadan is that the month passes slowly and richly, in sharp contrast to the compressed, forgettable months that precede and follow it. Ramadan is a month-long temporal landmark, a sustained disruption of routine that produces exactly the kind of novel, emotionally significant, socially embedded experience that the brain needs to generate a rich temporal map. In Hinduism, the concept of Kali Yuga, the fourth and final age of the cosmic cycle, the age of darkness, conflict, and spiritual decline, includes the prediction that time itself will seem to accelerate as the age reaches its climax. The Bhagavata Purana describes the Kali Yuga as an age in which Dharma declines, materialism increases, attention fragments, and the subjective experience of time compresses until the moments pass so quickly that people cannot distinguish one day from the next. The description is remarkably specific and remarkably prescient, an ancient prediction that reads like a contemporary diagnosis of the digital age. In the next stage, we will examine what physics says about the nature of time itself, whether time is fundamental or emergent, whether the acceleration is purely subjective or reflects a deeper physical reality, and whether the provocative hypothesis that we are living in a simulation could explain why time feels increasingly compressed. Because the neuroscience explains why the brain perceives acceleration. But the question of whether something deeper is happening, something that the contemplative traditions have been predicting for millennia, and that the physics of information, entropy, and consciousness may illuminate, requires a different kind of investigation. We have established that the subjective acceleration of time is a neurological phenomenon caused by the decline of novelty, the fragmentation of attention, the depletion of dopamine, and the collapse of temporal landmarks in a civilization that has traded deep experience for shallow stimulation, the brain constructs the experience of time from memory density, and the conditions of modern life systematically reduce memory density, producing the universal sensation that time is speeding up. But is the acceleration purely subjective? Is it nothing more than a neurochemical artifact, a perceptual distortion caused by the brain's changing relationship with its environment? Or is there something deeper happening, something that the physics of time, entropy, and information can illuminate? To answer this question, we must revisit what physics says about the nature of time itself, and what physics says is far stranger, far more unsettling, and far more relevant to the experience of temporal acceleration than most people realize. In our investigation of time at the beginning of this series, we established that time, according to general relativity, is not a universal, uniformly flowing river that carries everything forward at the same rate. Time is a dimension of space-time woven into the fabric of reality alongside the three spatial dimensions, shaped by the presence of mass and energy, and flowing at different rates in different locations depending on the gravitational field and the velocity of the observer. A clock on a mountaintop runs faster than a clock in a valley. A clock on a speeding rocket runs slower than a clock on the ground. Time is not a fixed background against which events occur. It is a dynamic, flexible, locally variable feature of the geometry of the universe. This is gravitational time dilation, confirmed by GPS satellites, by the Pound-Rebka experiment, and by every precision test of general relativity that has ever been performed. The rate at which time passes depends on where you are in the gravitational field, and this dependence is not a curiosity of exotic physics. It is a feature of everyday life. The GPS in your phone corrects for gravitational time dilation every second, adjusting for the fact that the satellite clocks, orbiting far from Earth's gravitational field, run faster than the clocks on the ground by approximately 45 microseconds per day. The deeper implication of general relativity is that time is not a universal quantity. There is no single, objective rate of time that applies everywhere. Each point in the universe has its own local time, determined by the local gravitational field and the local velocity. The time measured by your wristwatch is not the same as the time measured by a clock on the International Space Station, which is not the same as the time measured by a clock on the surface of a neutron star, which is not the same as the time measured by a clock falling into a black hole. Time is local, relative, and observer-dependent. The question, how fast is time passing, has no universal answer. It depends on who is asking, where they are, and how they are moving. This relativity of time has a specific implication for our investigation. If time has no universal rate, then the question, is time speeding up, is not a question about a universal quantity. It is a question about the local experience of a specific observer, in this case, a human consciousness embedded in a specific gravitational field, processing information at a specific rate, and constructing the experience of temporal flow from the specific neurochemical and informational conditions of its situation. The acceleration of time is not a cosmic event. It is a local event, local to the consciousness that experiences it, determined by the conditions under which that consciousness processes temporal information. But gravitational time dilation does not explain the subjective acceleration that people are reporting. The Earth's gravitational field has not changed. The clocks are not running faster. The objective rate of time is unchanged. If the acceleration is not gravitational, then what is it? The first physical framework that offers an answer is thermodynamics, specifically the relationship between entropy and the arrow of time. The second law of thermodynamics states that the entropy of an isolated system never decreases. Entropy, the measure of disorder, of randomness, of the number of microscopic configurations that correspond to a macroscopic state increases with time. This increase is the arrow of time, the physical quantity that distinguishes the past from the future, that gives time its directionality, that makes the flow of time irreversible. The past is the direction of lower entropy. The future is the direction of higher entropy. And the experience of time flowing, the sensation that the present is moving from the past toward the future, is the subjective experience of the entropy of the universe increasing. The physicist Arthur Eddington called the second law of thermodynamics the supreme law of nature, and argued that the arrow of time is more fundamental than any other feature of physical reality. Without the entropy increase, there would be no arrow of time. Without the arrow of time, there would be no experience of time passing. And without the experience of time passing, there would be no consciousness as we know it. Because consciousness is, at its most basic level, the experience of one moment following another, the experience of the entropy, arrow pointing from past to future. The connection between entropy and consciousness is deeper than it might appear. The neuroscientist Carl Friston has proposed the free energy principle, the idea that every self-organizing system, including the brain, acts to minimize its free energy, which is closely related to entropy. The brain is an entropy managing system. It takes the high entropy sensory input from the environment and reduces it to low entropy internal models that can predict and control the organism's interaction with the world. The experience of time, the experience of one moment following another, in an ordered, predictable, causally connected sequence, is one of the brain's most fundamental entropy-reducing operations. The brain imposes temporal order on the entropy of the sensory stream, creating the experience of a coherent, flowing, narratively structured timeline from what would otherwise be a chaotic, unstructured, temporally disordered flood of information. When the brain's entropy-reducing capacity is impaired by distraction, by fatigue, by information overload, by the depletion of the neurochemical resources that support temporal processing, the temporal order that the brain imposes on experience becomes less detailed, less structured, and less richly resolved. The experience of time becomes coarser, the moments blur together, and the subjective sensation is acceleration, the feeling that time is moving faster because the brain is resolving fewer moments per unit of clock time. Now here is the question that the thermodynamic framework raises about the subjective acceleration of time. As the entropy of the universe increases, does the rate of entropy increase change? And if it does this change affect the subjective experience of temporal flow? The answer to the first question is yes. The rate of entropy increase is not constant. In the early universe, when the entropy was very low and the matter was densely concentrated, the rate of entropy increase was very high. The universe was changing rapidly, evolving from the nearly uniform plasma of the Big Bang into the structured, complex, information-rich cosmos that we inhabit today. As the universe expands and the entropy increases, the rate of entropy increase slows down in some regions and accelerates in others. In regions dominated by gravitational collapse around stars, galaxies, and black holes, the entropy increases rapidly. In regions dominated by the expansion of space, the vast voids between galaxy clusters, the entropy increases slowly. The connection between entropy rate and time perception was explored by the physicist and mathematician Marios Christodoulou and the information theorist James Hartle, who proposed that the subjective experience of time is connected to the rate at which a conscious system processes information. A system that processes information faster experiences more temporal resolution, more distinguishable moments per unit of clock time, and therefore experiences time as passing more slowly. A system that processes information slower experiences less temporal resolution, fewer distinguishable moments per unit of clock time, and therefore experiences time as passing more quickly. This information processing framework provides a physical basis for the subjective acceleration of time that complements the neurological explanation. If the brain's information processing rate decreases due to dopamine depletion, attention fragmentation, reduced novelty, or any other factor that reduces the density of conscious experience per unit of clock time, then the subjective experience of time will accelerate, not because the clock is running faster, but because the conscious system is processing fewer distinguishable moments per tick of the clock, producing a coarser temporal experience that feels, from the inside, like time is moving faster. The physicist Seth Lloyd, whose work on the computational universe we encountered in our investigation of evolution, has calculated that the total information processing capacity of a physical system is proportional to its energy and inversely proportional to its entropy. As entropy increases, the remaining processing capacity decreases. The system has less capacity to distinguish one moment from the next, and the subjective experience of time, which depends on the system's ability to distinguish moments, becomes coarser, faster, and less temporally resolved. The ultimate endpoint of this process is the heat death of the universe, the state of maximum entropy in which all energy gradients have been equalized, all information processing capacity has been exhausted, and the universe reaches thermodynamic equilibrium. At the heat death, no information processing is possible, no temporal distinctions can be made, no conscious experience of time can occur. The subjective experience of time, if any conscious system could still exist at the heat death, which it cannot, would be infinitely fast, because the information processing capacity would be zero and no moments could be distinguished at all. The subjective acceleration of time that we are experiencing now is, in this framework, a faint, early, local echo of the heat death. It is the beginning of the process by which increasing entropy progressively degrades the information processing capacity of conscious systems, producing a coarsening of temporal experience that will continue over cosmological timescales until the universe reaches equilibrium and time, subjectively, ceases to exist. We are not at the heat death, we are unimaginably far from it. But the principle that drives the heat death, the relentless increase of entropy, is the same principle that drives the subjective acceleration of time in the present moment. The Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology, which we encountered in our investigation of gravity, proposes that the heat death is not the end, but the beginning of a new cosmic cycle. At the heat death, when entropy is at its maximum and all information processing capacity has been exhausted, the geometry of space-time undergoes a conformal transformation that maps the infinite future of the old cycle onto the Big Bang of the new cycle. Time does not end, it begins again, and the subjective acceleration that preceded the heat death is replaced by the subjective deceleration of a new universe with low entropy and high information processing capacity. This is a remarkable result. It suggests that the subjective acceleration of time is not merely a neurological artifact. It is a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics, a consequence of the increasing entropy of the universe, reducing the information processing capacity of conscious systems, producing a progressive coarsening of temporal experience that the conscious system perceives as an acceleration of time. The acceleration is not happening to the clock. It is happening to the conscious system's capacity to process the clock, and the capacity is decreasing because the entropy is increasing as the second law of thermodynamics guarantees it must. The block universe framework, which we explored in our investigation of time, adds another dimension. In the block universe, time does not flow. Past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, laid out in a four-dimensional space-time block that is complete, unchanging, and eternal. The experience of time flowing, the sensation that the present is moving from the past toward the future, is not a feature of the block. It is a feature of consciousness, the way that a conscious being, embedded in the block, experiences the entropy gradient that gives time its directionality. In the block universe, the question, why is time speeding up, takes on a different meaning. Time is not speeding up in the block, because time does not flow in the block. What is changing is the rate at which consciousness traverses the block, the speed at which the conscious observers now moves along the entropy gradient, and this rate is determined by the observer's information processing capacity. A conscious system with high processing capacity traverses the block slowly. It resolves many moments per unit of block distance, producing a rich, detailed, slow temporal experience. A conscious system with low processing capacity traverses the block quickly. It resolves few moments per unit of block distance, producing a coarse, compressed, fast, temporal experience. The subjective acceleration of time is, in the block universe framework, a change in the resolution at which consciousness reads the block. The block has not changed. The information in it is the same. But the conscious system's capacity to read the information has decreased, producing a lower resolution rendering of the temporal dimension that the system experiences as acceleration. You are not moving through time faster. You are reading time at a lower resolution. Wheeler's participatory universe, which we explored in our investigation of evolution, adds a further dimension. If the universe brings itself into existence through the observations of the conscious beings it contains, then the temporal properties of the universe, including the subjective rate at which time passes, are determined, in part, by the quality of the observations. A civilization of deeply attentive, present moment aware, temporally rich observers would, in Wheeler's framework, co-create a universe with rich temporal properties. A civilization of distracted, fragmented, temporally impoverished observers would co-create a universe with compressed temporal properties. The acceleration of time is not merely something that is happening to us. It is something that we are co-creating through the quality of our attention. This is a radical claim, and it must be flagged as speculative. But it is consistent with Wheeler's framework, with the quantum mechanics of observation and measurement, and with the contemplative tradition's insistence that the quality of consciousness determines the quality of experienced reality. If the observations of conscious beings play a constitutive role in the unfolding of physical reality as quantum mechanics suggests, and as Wheeler explicitly proposed, then the collective degradation of human attention in the post-digital age may be contributing, at the most fundamental level, to the temporal compression that everyone is experiencing. Now we must consider the most provocative hypothesis, a hypothesis that must be presented with the clear caveat that it is speculative and unproven, but that has attracted serious attention from physicists and philosophers, and that provides a surprisingly coherent framework for understanding the acceleration of time. The simulation hypothesis, proposed by the philosopher Nick Bostrom at the University of Oxford in 2003, argues that at least one of three propositions must be true. Virtually all civilizations at our level of development go extinct before developing the technology to run detailed simulations of their ancestors. Virtually all civilizations that reach the simulation running stage choose not to run such simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. The logic is statistical. If civilizations routinely run ancestor simulations, then the number of simulated beings vastly exceeds the number of biological beings, and any randomly selected conscious being is almost certainly simulated rather than biological. Bostrom's argument is philosophical, not physical, but the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson has publicly stated that the probability of living in a simulation is very high. The physicist Max Tegmark has argued that the mathematical structure of reality is consistent with the simulation hypothesis, and the physicist James Gates at the University of Maryland has reported finding what appear to be error-correcting codes embedded in the equations of supersymmetric physics, the same type of codes used in computer software to detect and correct data transmission errors. The simulation hypothesis has been explored in a more rigorous framework by the physicists Silas Bean and colleagues at the University of Washington, who in 2012 proposed a method for testing whether we live in a lattice simulation. A simulation that models space-time as a discrete grid rather than a continuous medium. Bean showed that a lattice simulation would impose a maximum energy on the particles. It models an energy cutoff that would produce specific, measurable signatures in the cosmic ray spectrum. The predicted signatures have not been conclusively detected, but the approach demonstrates that the simulation hypothesis is not merely a philosophical speculation. It is a testable scientific hypothesis with specific, falsifiable predictions. The physicist Zohar Ringel and Dmitry Kovrizhin published a 2017 study suggesting that simulating certain quantum systems would require computational resources that grow exponentially with the size of the system, implying that a complete simulation of our universe would be impossible for any computer that obeys the laws of physics as we know them. This is a significant objection, but it assumes that the computer running the simulation obeys the same laws of physics as the simulation itself, which the simulation hypothesis does not require. The simulation hypothesis has a specific, testable implication for the subjective acceleration of time. In a computer simulation, processing resources are finite. The simulation must allocate its computational resources among all the processes it models: the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the consciousness of the simulated beings, and whatever else the simulation includes. If the complexity of the simulation increases, if the number of conscious beings increases, if the information density of the simulated world increases, if the interactions between simulated entities become more complex, then the simulation must either allocate more resources or reduce the resolution at which it models each process. One way to reduce the resolution without the simulated beings noticing is to compress the temporal dimension. Instead of modeling every moment at full resolution, the simulation could skip moments, compress intervals, and render the temporal dimension at progressively lower resolution as the computational demands increase. The simulated beings would experience this as time speeding up, as the feeling that the days are shorter, the years are passing faster, and the moments are less vivid than they used to be. They would not notice the compression directly, because their consciousness is part of the simulation and is being compressed along with everything else. The only evidence would be the subjective experience of acceleration, the feeling that something has changed about the quality of time, without being able to identify what has changed or why. The exponential increase in global information, the explosion of data, the proliferation of connected devices, the growth of artificial intelligence, the increasing complexity of the digital infrastructure that the modern world depends on would, in the simulation framework, correspond to an exponential increase in the computational demands on the simulation. And the temporal compression that the simulation would apply to manage these demands would correspond to the subjective acceleration of time that people have been reporting with increasing urgency since the dawn of the digital age. Let us be clear about the status of this hypothesis. It is speculative, it is not proven, it may not be provable, and it is not the only explanation for the subjective acceleration of time. The neurological and thermodynamic explanations that we have already examined are sufficient on their own to account for the phenomenon. The simulation hypothesis is not presented as the answer. It is presented as a possibility that is taken seriously by a growing number of physicists and philosophers, that is consistent with the data, and that provides a framework in which the subjective acceleration of time acquires a specific physical mechanism that goes beyond the neurological explanation. The contemplative traditions provide a framework for understanding the simulation hypothesis that is older and deeper than the computational language in which it is usually expressed. In Hinduism, the concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion that conceals the true nature of reality, describes the manifest world as a projection from a deeper, more fundamental reality. The world of forms, of objects, of separate entities moving through time and space is not the ultimate reality. It is a rendering, a projection, a display generated by the deeper reality of Brahman for the purpose of creative self-expression. The simulation hypothesis, in Hindu terms, is the claim that the rendering has a computational structure, that the projection from Brahman into the manifest world operates through a process that is analogous to computation, and that the temporal properties of the projection are determined by the computational parameters of the process. The Buddhist concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, through which consciousness moves until it achieves liberation, describes the manifest world as a constructed reality whose properties are determined by the karma of the beings who inhabit it. The world is not a fixed, independently existing reality. It is a co-creation, a shared projection generated by the collective karma of all sentient beings. The properties of this projection, including the subjective rate at which time passes, are determined by the quality of consciousness that generates it. When consciousness is clear, focused, and mindful, the projection is rich, detailed, and temporally spacious. When consciousness is scattered, distracted, and deluded, the projection is compressed, impoverished, and temporally accelerated. The Yogacara school's concept of the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness that we encountered in our investigation of dark matter, provides the mechanism. The alaya vijnana is the substrate from which the manifest world is projected. The seeds stored in the alaya vijnana determine the content of the projection, and the rate at which the seeds mature and manifest determines the temporal properties of the projected world. If the seeds are maturing faster, if the karma of the collective consciousness is ripening more rapidly, then the projected world would exhibit temporal acceleration. The simulation is running faster because the seeds are ripening faster. And the seeds are ripening faster because the collective karma of human civilization has reached a critical density that is accelerating the maturation process. In Christianity, the eschatological tradition, the theology of the end times, describes the acceleration of time as a feature of the final age. Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew, says, "If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." The shortening of the days is a specific prediction about the temporal properties of the final period of history, a prediction that the days will feel shorter, that the time will feel compressed, that the normal temporal spaciousness of human experience will be reduced as the age reaches its climax. The Book of Revelation describes the final period as a time of accelerating events, a cascade of transformations that unfold with increasing speed, each one following more rapidly than the last, producing the experience of a world that is rushing toward its culmination. The Greek word used in Revelation for this acceleration is tachos, speed, swiftness, the quality of happening quickly. The events of the end times happen on tachē, speedily, swiftly, with an acceleration that the text emphasizes repeatedly. The acceleration of time is, in the Christian eschatological framework, a signature of the approach of the end, not the end of the physical universe, but the end of the present age and the beginning of the age to come. In Islam, the hadith literature contains multiple, specific, detailed predictions about the acceleration of time in the period before the Day of Judgment. The hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah states, "The hour will not be established until time is compressed, so that a year will be like a month like a week like a day like an hour, and an hour like the burning of a palm leaf." This hadith is narrated in the collections of Ahmad and Tirmidhi and is considered authentic by multiple scholars. The compression it describes is geometric. Each level of temporal experience is compressed by the same ratio, producing an exponential acceleration that maps, with remarkable precision, onto the exponential increase in information density that the digital age has produced. The Islamic scholars have debated for centuries what the compression of time means. Some interpret it as a literal physical change in the rate of time. Others interpret it as a subjective change in the experience of time caused by the spiritual degradation of the age. And some contemporary scholars have proposed that the compression refers to the increasing speed of travel and communication that modern technology has produced. The shrinking of the experiential world that makes a journey that once took a month now take a day, effectively compressing the temporal experience of distance. What is remarkable is that every one of these interpretations is compatible with the scientific frameworks we have examined. The literal interpretation is compatible with the simulation hypothesis, a compression of the temporal resolution of the simulated reality. The subjective interpretation is compatible with the neurological and thermodynamic explanations, a reduction in the brain's temporal processing capacity caused by the conditions of the age. And the technological interpretation is compatible with the information theoretic framework. The exponential increase in information processing that reduces the available temporal resolution per conscious moment. The Islamic scholar Ibn Kathir, in his commentary on the hadith of time compression, noted that the compression would not be uniform across all people. Those who are closer to God, those who practice dhikr, who maintain their prayers, who live in a state of conscious awareness of the divine presence, would experience less compression than those who are heedless, distracted, and disconnected from the divine. The compression is proportional to the distance from divine remembrance. The more distracted the consciousness, the more compressed the time. The more mindful the consciousness, the more spacious the time. This observation aligns precisely with the neuroscience. Mindfulness meditation has been shown to slow the subjective perception of time. Meditators report that time passes more slowly during meditation, and that the temporal spaciousness of meditative awareness carries over into daily life, producing a general slowing of the subjective time rate. The Islamic tradition's prediction that dhikr practitioners would be partially protected from the temporal compression of the final age is, in the neuroscience framework, the prediction that sustained attentional practice would maintain the brain's temporal processing capacity against the degradation that the conditions of the age produce. In Judaism, the Talmud contains a passage that describes the approach of the Messianic age in terms that echo the Islamic hadith. In the generation when the Son of David will come, the years will be shortened. The shortening of years is a sign of the Messianic era, a temporal signature of the approaching redemption that, like the Christian eschatological framework, associates the acceleration of time with the culmination of history and the transition to a new mode of existence. The Kabbalistic tradition provides the most detailed temporal cosmology in Jewish thought. The Zohar describes time as a garment that the divine light wears, a covering that conceals the eternal, timeless nature of the divine reality beneath a surface of temporal flow. As the world approaches its tikkun, its repair, its completion, the garment of time thins, and the timeless divine light shines more brightly through the thinning fabric. The subjective experience of time acceleration is, in the Zoharic framework, the experience of the temporal garment thinning, the experience of clock time becoming less substantial, less opaque, less capable of concealing the eternal present that the garment was designed to cover. The convergence of the scientific and the contemplative frameworks is now unmistakable. The neuroscience says time is accelerating because the brain is processing fewer temporal landmarks. The thermodynamics says time is accelerating because the entropy increase is reducing the information processing capacity of conscious systems. The simulation hypothesis says time might be accelerating because the computational demands of an increasingly complex world require temporal compression, and the contemplative traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, all describe the acceleration of time as a feature of the age in which we live, the final age, the age of spiritual decline, the age that precedes the transformation. The question is not whether time is accelerating. The experience is too universal, too consistent, and too well documented to be dismissed. The question is what the acceleration means. Is it merely a neurological artifact, a perceptual distortion with no cosmic significance? Is it a thermodynamic inevitability, a consequence of the entropy arrow that will continue until the heat death of the universe? Is it a computational effect, a feature of a simulation that is managing its resources? Or is it what the contemplative traditions say it is, a sign, a signal, a temporal signature of an age that is approaching its end and that is being compressed by forces beyond ordinary perception, in preparation for a transformation that every tradition has predicted and that no one fully understands? In the next stage, we will examine what the traditions prescribe and what the physics supports as the response to the acceleration of time. Because if time is accelerating, whether for neurological, thermodynamic, computational, or spiritual reasons, then the question becomes, can it be slowed? Can the temporal resolution be restored? Can the spaciousness of childhood time be recovered in adulthood, in the digital age, in the final period that every tradition describes? And the answer, as the contemplative traditions have been teaching for millennia, and as the neuroscience is beginning to confirm, is yes. But the method is not what you might expect. We have established that the subjective acceleration of time has multiple, converging causes. The neuroscience identifies the collapse of temporal landmarks, the fragmentation of attention, and the depletion of dopamine. The thermodynamics identifies the progressive reduction in information processing capacity as entropy increases. The simulation hypothesis suggests the possibility of computational temporal compression, and the contemplative traditions identify the acceleration as a feature of the age, a predicted, prophesied, spiritually significant sign that the current mode of human existence is approaching a transformation. Now we must ask the most practical question of all: can time be slowed? Can the temporal spaciousness of childhood be recovered? Can the richness of a moment be restored in an age that seems designed to destroy it? And if so, how? The contemplative traditions do not merely diagnose the acceleration of time. They prescribe specific, practice-based, community-supported remedies that have been tested over millennia, and that the neuroscience of the past 2 decades has begun to confirm. These remedies do not change the clock, they change the consciousness that reads the clock. And by changing the consciousness, they change the subjective experience of time in ways that are measurable, reproducible, and profound. In Christianity, the most radical remedy for the acceleration of time is the practice of contemplative prayer, the sustained, wordless, attention-focused, resting in the presence of God that the Christian mystical tradition has developed over 2,000 years. The anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, writing in 14th century England, described contemplative prayer as the practice of bringing the mind to a single point of attention and holding it there, releasing every thought, every image, and every distraction that arises, and returning, again and again, to the bare awareness of the divine presence. The practice is simple in concept and devastating in execution. The mind resists. It generates distractions. It produces thoughts, memories, fantasies, anxieties, and plans in an unrelenting stream that the practitioner must observe without engaging, release without following, and return from without frustration. The practice is the training of attention itself, the strengthening of the faculty that produces temporal landmarks, that generates memory density, and that determines, at the neurological level, how richly the brain resolves each moment of experience. The 16th century Spanish mystic Teresa of Avila described the temporal effects of deep contemplative prayer with extraordinary precision. In the seventh mansion of her interior castle, the final stage of the contemplative journey, the stage of spiritual marriage, Teresa reports that the experience of time is fundamentally altered. The normal flow of chronos ceases, the anxious rush from one moment to the next dissolves, and the soul enters a state of permanent, uninterrupted awareness of the divine presence that Teresa describes as a forgetfulness of time, not the forgetfulness of the distracted mind, which loses time because it is not paying attention, the forgetfulness of the contemplative mind, which transcends time because it is paying such complete attention that the distinction between past, present, and future ceases to be relevant. Teresa's description matches the phenomenology that advanced meditators report across every tradition. At the deepest levels of contemplative practice, the subjective experience of time is not merely slowed, it is transcended. The practitioner does not experience slow time. They experience no time, the kairos that has dissolved the chronos, the eternal present that the temporal garment of the Zohar was designed to conceal. The acceleration of time is reversed so completely that time itself ceases to be experienced as a sequence of moments and becomes instead a single, vast, undivided present in which everything is available and nothing is passing. The centering prayer movement, developed by Thomas Keating in the 20th century as a modern adaptation of the contemplative tradition, has made this practice accessible to millions of ordinary Christians. Keating's method involves choosing a sacred word, a single word such as God, love, peace, or mercy, and using it as an anchor for attention during 20-minute sessions of silent prayer twice daily. When the mind wanders, the practitioner gently returns to the sacred word. The practice is not the repetition of the word, it is the return, the repeated exercise of the attention muscle, the repeated choosing of presence over distraction, the repeated preference for the depth of the present moment over the shallow urgency of the next thought. The neuroscience of centering prayer has been studied by the psychologist John Dunn and colleagues at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Their research shows that centering prayer practitioners develop enhanced attentional control, reduced default mode network activity, and increased connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the regions associated with present moment awareness. These are precisely the neural changes that the neuroscience of time perception predicts would slow the subjective rate of time. Enhanced attention produces more temporal landmarks per unit of clock time. Reduced default mode activity reduces the self-referential thought stream that fragments attention, and increased present moment connectivity produces the kind of deep, focused, memory-rich processing that the distracted brain cannot achieve. The liturgical rhythm of the Christian day, the liturgy of the hours, practiced in monasteries and increasingly in lay communities, is a temporal architecture designed to segment the day into distinct, memorable, qualitatively rich intervals. The traditional monastic day includes 7 prayer offices: vigils in the deep night, lauds at dawn, prime at the first hour, terce at the 3rd hour, sext at the 6th hour, none at the 9th hour, vespers at sunset, and compline before sleep. Each office is marked by specific psalms, specific hymns, and specific prayers that distinguish it from every other office, creating a day that is segmented into 7 distinct temporal landmarks, 7 moments of kairos that break the flow of chronos and produce a temporal map of extraordinary richness. The sociologist of religion Robert Wuthnow has documented that people who participate in regular religious rituals report significantly higher levels of temporal satisfaction than people who do not, a greater sense that time is being well spent, a reduced feeling of time pressure, and a stronger sense of temporal coherence and meaning. The effect is not explained by personality differences or by the social support that religious communities provide. It is specifically associated with the ritual dimension, with the rhythmic, structured, temporal architecture that religious practice imposes on the flow of daily life. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in A Secular Age, described the modern experience of time as homogeneous, empty time, a featureless, uniform, qualityless flow in which one moment is identical to every other moment, and in which the only distinction is quantitative, how much time has passed. Taylor contrasted this with the pre-modern experience of time, which was structured by liturgical rhythms, seasonal festivals, and sacred calendars that gave each period of time its own distinctive quality, its own emotional tone, and its own spiritual significance. The transition from pre-modern to modern time is the transition from kairos-rich time to kairos-empty time, from a temporal landscape full of qualitative landmarks to a temporal desert of undifferentiated chronos. The acceleration of time that modern people report is, in Taylor's framework, the subjective experience of living in homogeneous, empty time. The time feels fast because it has no texture, no quality, no landmarks to slow it down. The pre-modern person's time was slow because it was full of kairos, full of sacred moments, festival days, liturgical seasons, and ritual practices that gave each period its own distinctive character. The modern person's time is fast because it has been emptied of kairos, emptied of the qualitative richness that the sacred calendar provided and that the secular calendar does not replace. The Benedictine monk who follows the liturgy of the hours does not experience the time compression of the modern office worker, because the Benedictine's day is structured by temporal landmarks that the office worker's day lacks. The monk's morning is not a blur of undifferentiated email and meetings. It is a sequence of distinct, qualitatively rich, emotionally and spiritually significant events. Vigils in the darkness, lauds as the sun rises, the first reading of scripture, the first silence of the morning, each one a fresh experience that the brain encodes as a separate memory with a separate timestamp. The monk's time is slow because the monk's day is rich. And the day is rich because the liturgical structure provides exactly the temporal landmarks that the brain needs to produce a detailed temporal map. The practice of the Sabbath shared by Christianity and Judaism is the weekly temporal intervention that prevents the accumulation of undifferentiated time. The Sabbath is a day, unlike other days, a day of rest, of worship, of community, of shared meals, of the deliberate cessation of productive activity that distinguishes every other day of the week. The Sabbath is the supreme temporal landmark, 24 hours of qualitatively distinct experience that the brain cannot compress into the routine of the work week, because it is, by design, the opposite of the routine. The Sabbath practitioner has 52 temporal landmarks per year, that the non-practitioner does not have 52 weekly resets that prevent the year from collapsing into an undifferentiated blur. The Jewish temporal architecture extends far beyond the weekly Sabbath. The Jewish calendar includes a rich system of festivals, fasts, and commemorations that structure the entire year with temporal landmarks of extraordinary emotional and spiritual density. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, Passover, Shavuot. Each festival is a week-long or day-long immersion in a qualitatively distinct mode of experience that breaks the routine of ordinary life and produces a dense cluster of novel, emotionally significant, communally shared memories. The Jewish person who observes the full calendar has a year that is richly segmented, densely landmarked, and subjectively slow a year in which each season has its own character, each month has its own rhythm, and each week has its own temporal texture. The Hasidic tradition's practice of hitbodedut, solitary, spontaneous spoken prayer in nature, is a particularly powerful temporal intervention. The practitioner goes to a secluded natural place, ideally a forest or a field, and speaks to God in their own words, pouring out their heart without a script, without a formula, without the routine structure that can turn prayer into a reflexive habit. Hitbodhidut is the deliberate production of temporal novelty within the practice of prayer itself, a practice that prevents even the spiritual life from becoming routinized and ensures that each prayer is a fresh, unrepeatable, genuinely novel encounter with the divine. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who championed Hitbodhidut, taught that the practice should be performed for at least an hour daily. The hour of Hitbodhidut, Nachman taught, is an hour that expands, that feels longer than its clock duration, that produces a richness and a depth of experience that transforms the entire day. In the neuroscience framework, Nachman is describing the temporal expansion that sustained, focused, emotionally intense, novel prayer produces through the generation of dense temporal landmarks in the hippocampus. In Buddhism, the practice of mindfulness sati is the most systematically developed and most thoroughly researched time-slowing technology in the contemplative world. The Buddha's primary teaching on mindfulness is the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, which describes 4 domains of mindful attention: the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mental objects. The practice is the sustained, moment-to-moment, non-reactive awareness of whatever is arising in each of these 4 domains. The practitioner does not try to change what is happening. They observe it with precision, with patience, and with the complete, undivided attention that produces the maximum density of temporal landmarks per unit of clock time. The neuroscience of mindfulness meditation has been studied more extensively than any other contemplative practice. The meta-analyses are now comprehensive. Mindfulness meditation increases grey matter density in the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory formation and the production of temporal landmarks. It increases grey matter in the insula, the region responsible for interoceptive awareness, the perception of internal body states that contributes to the sense of present moment richness. It decreases grey matter in the amygdala, the region responsible for the fear and stress responses that narrow attention and reduce the brain's capacity for broad, open, landmark-producing awareness. And it increases the thickness of the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for attentional control, the executive function that allows the meditator to sustain attention on the present moment rather than being pulled into the past or the future by the default mode network's restless rumination. The temporal effects of intensive meditation retreats are particularly dramatic. Practitioners who attend 7-day or 10-day silent meditation retreats, in which they meditate for 10 to 12 hours per day in silence, without phones, without reading material, without any external stimulation, consistently report that the retreat feels much longer than its clock duration. A 10-day retreat feels like a month-long retreat feels like a year. The retreat compresses no time at all. It expands time dramatically, palpably, unmistakably, by stripping away every distraction and forcing the brain to process each moment at maximum attentional depth. The retreat environment replicates, in a modern context, the conditions of the Desert Fathers. No screens, no social media, no entertainment, no external novelty, only the raw, unmediated, moment-to-moment experience of sitting, walking, eating, and breathing, observed with the full force of sustained attention. And the temporal effect is identical. The time slows to a crawl in the moment, but expands enormously in retrospect, because the brain, freed from distraction and operating at maximum attentional capacity, produces an extraordinary density of temporal landmarks per unit of clock time. The retreat effect demonstrates something important. The acceleration of time is not a fixed, age-dependent, irreversible process. It is a state that is produced by specific conditions, distraction, routine, novelty, deprivation, and that is reversed by opposite conditions, attention, novelty, present moment engagement. The retreat practitioner is not younger than they were before the retreat. Their dopamine levels are not higher. Their brain has not physically changed in 10 days. But their temporal experience has changed dramatically because the conditions under which their brain processes time have changed. The acceleration is not destiny. It is a choice about how to deploy the attention that determines the richness of each moment. The specific effect of mindfulness on time perception has been documented by multiple research groups. Mark Whitman, at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg, has shown that experienced meditators report a slower, subjective passage of time than non-meditators. Robin Kramer, at the University of Lincoln, has demonstrated that even brief mindfulness interventions as short as 10 minutes produce a measurable slowing of subjective time, with participants estimating that more time has passed than the clock indicates. And Sylvie Droit-Vollet at the Université Clermont-Auvergne has shown that mindfulness specifically enhances the brain's sensitivity to temporal information, producing more precise temporal judgments and a richer, more detailed temporal experience. The mechanism is exactly what the neuroscience of time perception predicts. Mindfulness increases the density of conscious experience per unit of clock time. It produces more temporal landmarks by directing sustained, focused, non-reactive attention to the present moment, creating the kind of deep, vivid, emotionally engaged, memory-producing experience that the fragmented, distracted, digitally saturated mind cannot generate. The meditator's time is slower because the meditator's moments are richer, and the moments are richer because the meditator is actually present for them fully, completely, attentionally present, in a way that the average smartphone user is present for nothing. The Zen tradition provides the most radical formulation of the relationship between attention and time. The Zen master Dogen, in his Shobogenzo, describes the experience of being time uji, in which time is not something that passes by you, but something that you are. You are not in time. You are time. Each moment is not a container through which you move. Each moment is you, the specific, irreducible, unrepeatable configuration of consciousness that constitutes your existence at this point in the block. The acceleration of time is, in Dogen's framework, the experience of being less fully yourself at each moment, of being partially present, partially absent, partially here and partially elsewhere, with the absent portion of your being time disappearing into the void of inattention. The cure is presence. The cure is being fully, completely, unreservedly at each moment being time, rather than passing through time. The practice of Zazen Zen sitting meditation is the training in being time. The practitioner sits, they do nothing, they produce nothing, they accomplish nothing. They simply sit with full attention in the present moment for the duration of the sitting period. The practice is the most economical, most direct, and most powerful temporal intervention available to a human being. The deliberate, sustained, total investment of attention in the present moment, with no goal, no purpose, and no intention beyond being fully present. And the result, reported consistently by practitioners across centuries and across cultures, is the experience of temporal spaciousness, the feeling that the moment is vast, that the present is infinite, that the rush of time has slowed to a stillness in which everything is available and nothing is lost. In Islam, the practice of muraqabah, vigilant self-awareness in the presence of God, is the Sufi equivalent of mindfulness meditation. Muraqabah means watchfulness, the sustained awareness that God is observing you at every moment, and that your every action, thought, and intention is witnessed by the divine presence. The practice produces a quality of self-awareness that is structurally identical to mindfulness. The practitioner is fully present, fully attentive, fully engaged with each moment, because each moment is experienced as a moment of divine witness. The hastiness, the distraction, the inattentiveness that characterize the heedless life are replaced by a deliberate, reverent, temporally rich awareness that the Sufi tradition describes as the expansion of time, bast al-zaman, the experience of time slowing down in the presence of God. The concept of bast al-zaman is well documented in the Sufi literature. The Sufi masters report that during states of deep muraqabah, the subjective experience of time changes dramatically. Minutes feel like hours, hours feel like days, and the normal rush of temporal experience is replaced by a spaciousness, a depth, and a richness that the Sufi tradition attributes to the barakah that God places in the time of those who remember Him. The barakah is not a magical quantity that changes the clock. It is the expansion of conscious experience per unit of clock time, that the sustained practice of divine remembrance produces the same expansion that the neuroscience of mindfulness documents in secular meditators. The Naqshbandi Sufi order has developed a specific practice called Hush Dar Dam, awareness in each breath, that is the Islamic equivalent of Zen's moment-to-moment awareness. The practitioner maintains continuous awareness of the divine name with each inhalation and each exhalation, transforming the most basic, most continuous, most automatic physiological process into a vehicle for sustained present moment awareness. The breath is the ultimate temporal anchor. It is always happening, always available, always in the present moment. By tying awareness to the breath, the practitioner ensures that their attention is anchored in the present at every moment, preventing the drift into past rumination and future anxiety that fragments attention and accelerates the subjective rate of time. The Qadiri Sufi order's practice of communal dhikr, the group remembrance of God through rhythmic chanting, swaying, and breathing, produces the inter-brain synchrony that we examined in our investigation of gravity. The synchronized movement, the shared rhythm, the collective focus on the divine name produce a communal field of attention that amplifies the individual's capacity for present moment awareness. The communal dhikr is a temporal intervention that operates at the collective level, a practice that produces temporal spaciousness not only for the individual but for the group, creating a shared experience of expanded time that the solitary practitioner cannot generate alone. The 5 daily prayers of Islam are the communal, rhythmic, embodied version of muraqabah, a schedule of 5 daily pauses in which the believer stops whatever they are doing, turns toward Mecca, and enters a structured, ritualized, attentionally demanding practice of worship that interrupts the flow of routine and produces a temporal landmark of high emotional and spiritual significance. The prayers are not merely religious obligations. They are temporal technologies, 5 daily interventions that prevent the accumulation of undifferentiated time and that ensure that the believer's day contains at least 5 moments of full, focused, present moment awareness. In Hinduism, the practice of dharana concentration, the 6th limb of Patanjali's yoga, is the specific training in sustained attention that produces the temporal spaciousness that dhyana and samadhi culminate in. Dharana is the practice of fixing attention on a single point, a mantra, a yantra, the breath, the tip of the nose, the heart center, and holding it there, without wavering, for extended periods. The practice is the direct, systematic strengthening of the attentional faculty that the digital age has systematically weakened. The Yoga Sutras describe the progression from dharana to dhyana to samadhi as a deepening of temporal experience. In dharana, attention is held on the object with effort. In dhyana, the effort dissolves and attention flows naturally toward the object without interruption. And in samadhi, the distinction between the attention and the object dissolves entirely, producing an experience of temporal transcendence, an experience in which the past and the future cease to exist, and only the present remains, infinite, unbounded, and complete. The ancient Vedic practice of Sandhya Vandana, the threefold daily worship performed at dawn, noon, and dusk, serves the same temporal function as the Christian liturgy of the hours and the Islamic 5 daily prayers. The 3 junctures of the day, sunrise, solar, noon, and sunset, are marked by specific mantras, specific rituals, and specific meditations that transform the transitions between morning, afternoon, and evening into temporal landmarks of spiritual significance. The practitioner's day is not a uniform stream of undifferentiated time. It is a structured sequence of qualitatively distinct periods, each one initiated by a ritual that demands full attention and that produces the kind of memorable, emotionally significant experience that the brain uses to construct a rich temporal map. The practice of nature immersion Shinrin-yoku in the Japanese tradition, friluftsliv in the Scandinavian, and simply being in nature in every other tradition is another powerful temporal intervention. The psychologist Mark Berman at the University of Michigan has shown that spending time in natural environments restores attentional capacity, reduces stress hormones, and improves the brain's capacity for the kind of sustained, open, receptive awareness that produces temporal landmarks. Nature is the original environment, the environment in which the brain evolved, the environment that provides the multisensory, spatially rich, temporally varied stimulation that the brain was designed to process. The digital environment, by contrast, is a sensory desert, visually flat, auditorily monotonous, olfactorily and tactilely void, and temporally compressed. The brain in nature is operating in the environment it was built for. The brain on a screen is operating in an environment it was not built for. And the temporal consequences follow directly. Nature time is slow, rich, and memorable. Screen time is fast, flat, and forgettable. Every contemplative tradition includes nature as a component of the practice. The Buddha achieved enlightenment under a tree. Jesus retreated to the wilderness for 40 days. Muhammad received the first revelation in a cave on a mountain. The Desert Fathers lived in the desert. The Celtic Christian monks built their monasteries on wind-swept islands. The Sufi masters practiced in gardens. The Hindu rishis meditated in forests. The practice of contemplation and the practice of nature immersion are, in every tradition, inseparable, because both practices serve the same function: the restoration of the full, embodied, multi-sensory, present moment awareness that the brain requires to produce a rich temporal experience. The neuroscience confirms what the traditions prescribe. The specific practices that every tradition recommends for addressing the acceleration of time: sustained attention, present moment awareness, rhythmic interruption of routine, communal worship, embodied ritual, deliberate novelty, and the cessation of compulsive productivity are precisely the practices that the neuroscience of time perception identifies as the factors that produce temporal landmarks, that increase memory density, and that slow the subjective rate of time. The convergence is not a coincidence. The traditions and the neuroscience are describing the same reality from different perspectives. The traditions describe the experiential dimension, the feeling of temporal spaciousness that sustained practice produces, the quality of presence that makes each moment richer, the sense of baraka or kairos or uji that transforms the experience of time from a rushed, compressed, anxiety-driven scramble into a spacious, rich, deeply satisfying encounter with reality. The neuroscience describes the mechanistic dimension, the increased hippocampal density, the enhanced prefrontal control, the reduced amygdala reactivity, the increased temporal landmark production, the higher memory density per unit of clock time. The descriptions are different. The reality is the same. And the reality is this: time can be slowed. Not by changing the clock, not by altering the physics, but by changing the quality of attention that consciousness brings to each moment. The acceleration of time is caused by the degradation of attention. The remedy for the acceleration is the restoration of attention. And the traditions that have been developing attention restoration technologies for millennia have arrived through empirical trial and error conducted over thousands of years at precisely the practices that the neuroscience now validates. In the final stage of this investigation, we will bring everything together: the neuroscience, the physics, the simulation hypothesis, and the contemplative traditions. We will ask what the acceleration of time reveals about the nature of consciousness, the nature of the age in which we live, and the nature of the relationship between the human mind and the universe it inhabits. Because the acceleration of time is not merely a psychological inconvenience. It is a symptom of a civilization that has lost its relationship with the present moment, and that is, as a consequence, losing its relationship with reality itself. And the restoration of that relationship may be the most important task that the human species faces in this century. We have now traced the acceleration of time through every layer of explanation available to us. The neuroscience has shown that the brain constructs the experience of time from memory density, and that the conditions of modern life, routine, distraction, dopamine depletion, and the collapse of temporal landmarks systematically reduce memory density, producing the universal sensation that time is speeding up. The physics has shown that time is not a universal constant but a local, observer-dependent, information processing rate-determined quantity that changes with the conditions under which consciousness processes temporal information. The simulation hypothesis has raised the possibility that the acceleration reflects a computational compression of the temporal dimension in response to increasing informational demands. And the contemplative traditions have identified the acceleration as a predicted, prophesied feature of the age in which we live, an age that every tradition describes as the final period before a fundamental transformation. Now we must bring all of this together and ask what the acceleration of time reveals about consciousness, about the age we live in, and about the relationship between the human mind and the universe it inhabits. Let us begin with what the acceleration reveals about consciousness. The most important insight that this investigation has produced is also the simplest. Time is not something that happens to you. Time is something you produce. The experience of temporal flow, the sensation that one moment follows another, that the present is moving from the past toward the future, that the day has a beginning and an end, is not a feature of the external world that your consciousness passively receives. It is a feature of your consciousness that you actively construct from the raw materials of attention, memory, novelty, and emotional engagement. The clock provides the substrate. Your consciousness provides the experience, and the quality of the experience is determined not by the clock, but by the consciousness. Every investigation in this series has pointed toward this conclusion from a different angle. In our investigation of the first observer, we established that consciousness may be constitutive of physical reality, that the universe requires observers to collapse its quantum states into definite outcomes. In our investigation of distance, we established that space is emergent from entanglement, that the geometry of the world is produced by the pattern of quantum correlations. In our investigation of gravity, we established that the curvature of space-time is the geometric expression of entanglement, that attraction is produced by connection. And now, in this investigation, we have established that time is produced by consciousness that the experience of temporal flow is constructed by the brain from the raw materials of attention, novelty, and memory. The picture that emerges is consistent and stunning. Consciousness does not passively inhabit a pre-existing reality of space and time. Consciousness actively constructs the reality it inhabits, constructing space from entanglement, time from attention, gravity from connection, and the experience of a coherent, flowing, meaningful universe from the raw quantum information that constitutes the ground of physical reality. The acceleration of time is not a cosmic event that consciousness helplessly observes. It is a feature of consciousness that consciousness actively produces, and that consciousness has the power to change. This means that the acceleration of time is not something that is being done to you. It is something you are doing, or more precisely, something you are failing to do. The time is fast because you are not paying attention. The moments are thin because you are not fully present for them. The years are blurred because you are not generating the temporal landmarks that would distinguish one period from another. The acceleration is not a cosmic event. It is a personal event, a consequence of the specific, changeable, practice-responsive way that you deploy your attention in each moment of your life. This is simultaneously the most empowering and the most confronting conclusion of the investigation. It is empowering because it means the acceleration is not inevitable. It is not a fixed consequence of aging, of modernity, or of the entropy increase of the universe. It is a consequence of attention, and attention can be trained. The contemplative traditions have been training attention for millennia, and the neuroscience confirms that the training works. Mindfulness increases temporal landmark density, reduces the subjective speed of time, and produces measurable changes in the brain regions that process temporal information. The acceleration can be reversed. The richness can be restored. The temporal spaciousness of childhood can be recovered in adulthood through the systematic training of the attentional faculty that produces it. It is confronting because it means that you are responsible. The time is not fast because the universe is conspiring against you. The time is fast because you are choosing in every moment, with every swipe, with every distracted glance at your phone, with every routine day that you allow to pass, without generating a single temporal landmark to produce a thin, compressed, landmark-free temporal experience that the brain will remember as a blur. The acceleration is not happening to you. You are producing it, and you can stop producing it at any time, but only if you are willing to change the way you pay attention. Now, let us consider what the acceleration reveals about the age we live in. Every contemplative tradition identifies the acceleration of time as a feature of the final age, the period that precedes the transformation. In Christianity, it is the eschaton, the end times described in Matthew 24 and the book of Revelation, in which the days are shortened and the events accelerate toward the second coming. In Islam, it is the period before the Day of Judgment, the era described in the hadith of Abu Hurairah, in which time compresses geometrically until an hour feels like the burning of a palm leaf. In Hinduism, it is the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, materialism, and spiritual decline that precedes the dissolution and renewal of the cosmic cycle. In Buddhism, it is the age of mappo, the degenerate age, the age in which the Dharma has declined to the point that ordinary practice is insufficient and only the most radical methods of awakening are effective. And in Judaism, it is the period before the coming of the Messiah, the era in which the years are shortened and the signs of the approaching redemption multiply. The traditions do not agree on the details. They do not agree on the timeline, the mechanism, or the nature of the transformation that follows the final age. But they agree on the structure. The final age is an age of acceleration, of compression, of the intensification of the conditions that make ordinary life increasingly difficult and that demand an increasingly radical response. The acceleration of time is not merely a symptom of the age. It is a defining feature, the temporal signature of a civilization that has reached the limits of its current mode of existence, and that is being compressed by forces beyond its control toward a transformation that it has not yet understood. The physicist and complexity theorist Geoffrey West has documented a secular version of this acceleration in his research on the scaling laws of cities and civilizations. West showed that as human civilizations grow in population and complexity, the rate of innovation must increase to keep pace with the increasing demands on resources, infrastructure, and social organization. Each innovation cycle is shorter than the last. Each technological revolution arrives sooner than the previous one. And the intervals between transformative innovations are shrinking toward a singularity, a point at which the rate of required innovation becomes infinite, and the current mode of civilization can no longer sustain itself. West's singularity is not the technological singularity of Ray Kurzweil, in which artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence and transforms civilization. It is a thermodynamic singularity, a point at which the entropy production of the civilization exceeds the civilization's capacity to manage it, and the system must either transform or collapse. The acceleration of time that people are experiencing may be the subjective perception of the approach to West's singularity, the feeling of the civilization's innovation cycles compressing toward a point that the system cannot pass without fundamental transformation. The futurist and inventor Ray Kurzweil has documented the same acceleration from the technological perspective. Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns describes the exponential increase in the rate of technological change. Each technological revolution, agriculture, writing, printing, industrialization, electrification, computation, networking, artificial intelligence arrives more quickly than the previous one, and the interval between revolutions is shrinking exponentially. Kurzweil projects that the rate of technological change in the 21st century will be equivalent to 20,000 years of change at the 20th century's rate, a compression of temporal experience that matches the subjective acceleration that everyone is reporting. The sociologist Hartmut Rosa has developed a comprehensive theory of social acceleration that describes three interlocking dimensions of the phenomenon: the acceleration of technology, faster transport, faster communication, faster computation, the acceleration of social change, faster turnover of jobs, relationships, cultural norms, and the acceleration of the pace of life. More activities compressed into less time, more decisions demanded per unit of experience. Rosa argues that these three accelerations reinforce each other in a self-amplifying spiral that produces the experience of a world that is perpetually speeding up, a world in which the individual cannot keep pace with the rate of change and experiences a chronic, pervasive, identity-threatening sense of temporal scarcity. Rosa's diagnosis aligns with the contemplative tradition's prediction of time compression in the final age. But Rosa offers no remedy beyond the political, the call for institutional deceleration, for slower economics, for less frantic modes of social organization. The contemplative traditions offer something deeper, the transformation of the consciousness that experiences the acceleration through practices that change not the external rate of change, but the internal quality of awareness that processes it. The traditions describe this transformation in their own languages. In Christianity, it is the second coming, the return of Christ, and the establishment of the kingdom of God. In Islam, it is the day of judgment, the day when the present order is dissolved and replaced by the eternal order of divine justice. In Hinduism, it is the end of the Kali Yuga and the beginning of a new Satya Yuga, a new golden age of Dharma, truth, and spiritual flourishing. In Buddhism, it is the coming of Maitreya, the future Buddha, who will renew the Dharma when the current teaching has been forgotten. And in Judaism, it is the Messianic age, the the age of redemption, peace, and the restoration of the divine presence in the world. The pattern is fractal. It repeats at every scale. The individual human life accelerates from the spacious childhood to the compressed adulthood. The civilization accelerates from the leisurely agrarian age to the frenetic digital age. And the cosmic cycle, in the traditions that describe it, accelerates from the spacious golden age to the compressed final age. The acceleration is not confined to one level. It is a principle that operates at every scale of temporal experience, from the biographical to the civilizational to the cosmic. These descriptions are not scientific predictions. They are not testable hypotheses about the future of human civilization. They are visionary frameworks, mythic narratives that encode, in symbolic language, the deep pattern that every tradition has perceived in the trajectory of human history. The pattern of acceleration, compression, crisis, and renewal that characterizes the transition from one mode of existence to another. The physicist David Bohm described this pattern in terms that bridge the scientific and the contemplative. In some sense, the present situation is like a crisis in the evolution of the human race. The crisis is not merely economic or political. It is a crisis of consciousness, a crisis in the way human beings relate to reality. And the resolution of the crisis requires not a new technology or a new political system, but a new mode of consciousness, a mode that is more attentive, more integrated, more present, and more capable of perceiving the deeper order of reality that the current mode of consciousness is too fragmented to apprehend. The physicist André Linde, one of the creators of inflationary cosmology, has speculated that consciousness may play a more fundamental role in the structure of the universe than physics currently acknowledges. The universe without an observer is dead, Linde has written. It has no color, no sound, no meaning, and crucially no time. The experience of time is produced by the consciousness that observes the universe, and the quality of that experience is determined by the quality of the consciousness. If Linde is right, then the acceleration of time is not merely a perceptual distortion. It is a degradation of the universe's temporal quality, produced by the degradation of the consciousness that generates time. The cure for the acceleration is not a change in the external world. It is a change in the consciousness that the external world depends on for its temporal existence. Bohm's diagnosis aligns precisely with the convergence we have documented. The acceleration of time is a crisis of consciousness. The crisis is caused by the fragmentation of attention, and the resolution is the restoration of attention through the practices that the contemplative traditions have been developing for millennia, and that the neuroscience now validates. Now let us consider what the acceleration reveals about the relationship between consciousness and the universe. In our investigation of evolution, we established that the universe may be computing toward consciousness, that the evolutionary quantum algorithm is optimizing for the capacity for integrated, self-reflective, temporally rich conscious experience. If this is correct, then the acceleration of time is a paradox within the cosmic computation. The algorithm that is computing toward maximum consciousness has produced a civilization that is systematically degrading the temporal dimension of consciousness. The output is undermining itself. The computation is producing a result that contradicts its own objective function. But paradoxes, in the framework of every contemplative tradition, are not failures. They are invitations to a deeper level of understanding that resolves the paradox from a perspective that the paradox itself cannot provide. The acceleration of time may be the cosmic computation's way of forcing a breakthrough, of compressing the conditions of temporal existence until the inhabitants of the computation are forced to discover, through the urgency of their own temporal impoverishment, the practices and the perceptions that will restore the temporal richness that the computation requires. The Zen master Rinzai described this process with a metaphor that is directly applicable. When you meet a swordsman, draw your sword. Do not offer a poem to someone who is not a poet. The acceleration of time is a sword. It is cutting away the temporal fat, the routine, the distraction, the mindless consumption of pseudo-novelty that modern life provides as a substitute for genuine, present-moment awareness. The sword does not destroy time. It reveals what time always was. A product of consciousness, a construction of attention, a quality of presence that the modern world has neglected, and that the sword of acceleration is forcing us to recover. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron has described the experience of temporal acceleration in modern life as a form of groundlessness, the feeling that there is no solid ground beneath your feet, that everything is shifting too fast to find stability, that the present moment evaporates before you can inhabit it. And Chodron's teaching is that groundlessness is not a problem to be solved, it is a teacher. The groundlessness teaches you that the ground you are seeking, the stable, predictable, slowly unfolding temporal experience of a pre-digital world, was always an illusion. The true ground is not the slow time of childhood. The true ground is the present moment itself, the bare, immediate, pre-conceptual awareness that does not depend on the rate of temporal flow for its stability, because it is prior to temporal flow. The acceleration strips away the false ground and reveals the true ground, and the true ground is not slow time. It is no time, the timeless presence that the contemplative traditions call eternity, nirvana, the eternal now. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart described the relationship between time and eternity in terms that condense the entire investigation. Time is what keeps the light from reaching us. There is no greater obstacle to God than time. Time, for Eckhart, is not the medium in which we experience God. It is the barrier that prevents us from experiencing God. The acceleration of time, the thinning of the temporal garment, the compression of the chronos that separates us from the kairos is not a curse, it is a thinning of the barrier. The time is being compressed because the time is being prepared for dissolution for the moment, when the temporal garment becomes so thin that the eternal light shines through it, and the experience of time gives way to the experience of timelessness that every contemplative tradition describes as the goal of the spiritual life. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The acceleration of time is a wound in the fabric of temporal experience that the modern world has inflicted through its relentless assault on attention, presence, and the capacity for genuine engagement with the present moment. But the wound is also an opening. The compression of time is creating a thinness in the temporal fabric through which the timeless, the eternal present, the kairos, the divine ground can be perceived. The acceleration is painful, but the pain is the pain of a barrier thinning, not the pain of a substance being lost. The time is not being taken from you. The time is being compressed to the point where you can see through it, to the point where the illusion of chronos gives way to the reality of kairos, and the eternal present that was always there behind the temporal veil becomes visible at last. In Buddhism, the acceleration of time in the age of mappo is met with a specific response: the turn toward the most radical, most direct, most immediate forms of practice. In the age when ordinary methods fail, the Pure Land tradition teaches reliance on the power of Amitabha Buddha's vow. The Zen tradition teaches the direct, pointing that bypasses all gradual methods. And the Vajrayana tradition teaches the tantric practices that transform the very conditions of the degenerate age into the fuel for awakening. The acceleration is not an obstacle. It is a catalyst, a condition that, when met with the appropriate practice, produces a more rapid, more intense, and more complete awakening than the gentler conditions of an earlier age would allow. In Islam, the acceleration of time in the period before the Day of Judgment is met with the intensification of dhikr, the continuous, moment-to-moment, breath-to-breath remembrance of God that the Sufi tradition teaches is the most powerful practice available to human consciousness. The hadith literature teaches that in the final period, the reward for holding on to faith will be enormous, equivalent to the reward of 50 companions of the Prophet. Because the difficulty of maintaining presence in an age of acceleration is so much greater than the difficulty of maintaining presence in an age of spaciousness. The challenge is proportional to the reward, and the practice that meets the challenge, the sustained, relentless, moment-to-moment remembrance of God produces, in the practitioner, a quality of temporal experience that the conditions of the age cannot compress. The hadith about planting the seedling if the day of judgment arrives captures the Islamic tradition's profound insistence that the response to the acceleration is not withdrawal from the world but deeper engagement with it. Engagement that is transformed by presence, by intention, and by the consciousness of the divine that turns every ordinary action into an act of worship. The Muslim who plants the seedling in the face of the compression is not ignoring the compression. They are transcending it, acting in the eternal present that the temporal compression cannot touch, because the action is offered to God and therefore belongs to Kairos rather than Chronos. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita's teaching is addressed to Arjuna on the battlefield at the moment of maximum crisis, maximum compression, maximum urgency, and the teaching is, be present, perform your duty, offer every action to God, do not be attached to the results. This is the Gita's response to the acceleration. Not withdrawal, not resistance, not the attempt to slow the clock, but the transformation of the quality of consciousness within the acceleration. You cannot stop the Kali Yuga, you cannot slow the compression, but you can change the way you inhabit it by being fully present, fully attentive, fully engaged with each moment, offering each action as an act of worship, and living in the eternal present that the temporal compression cannot touch. The Jewish philosopher Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "The Sabbaths are our great cathedrals, the cathedrals of space. The great churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues were built to create sacred space. The Sabbath is built to create sacred time. And the crisis of the modern world is not a crisis of space. We have more space, more buildings, more infrastructure than any civilization in history. It is a crisis of time, a crisis of temporal quality, of temporal richness, of the capacity to inhabit each moment with the depth and the presence that the moment deserves. The solution is not more space. It is more Sabbath, more sacred time, more kairos, more deliberate interruption of the chronos that the digital economy has turned into an unbroken, undifferentiated, landmark-free stream of accelerating emptiness. The connection to every previous investigation is now clear. In our investigation of distance, we learned that separation is an illusion produced by decoherence. In our investigation of gravity, we learn that love is the conscious experience of the entanglement that constitutes reality. In our investigation of grief, we learn that death does not destroy the connections that love creates. In our investigation of evolution, we learn that the universe is computing toward consciousness. In our investigation of quarks, we learn that isolation is physically impossible at every scale. And now, in this investigation, we have learned that the acceleration of time is a crisis of attention. A crisis that the contemplative traditions diagnosed millennia ago and that the neuroscience is now confirming. A crisis whose resolution requires not new technology, but ancient wisdom, not faster processing, but deeper presence, not more information, but more attention to the information that each moment already contains. Now, let us state the synthesis. Time is not speeding up. Your attention is thinning out. The clock is unchanged. The moments are unchanged. The universe is offering you the same 24 hours it has always offered. But you are processing fewer of those hours at full resolution, generating fewer temporal landmarks, encoding fewer memories, and producing a thinner, more compressed, less temporally rich experience of the same objective duration. The cause is the degradation of attention, the fragmentation, the distraction, the displacement of deep experience by shallow stimulation, the replacement of kairos with pseudo-novelty, the systematic erosion of the contemplative capacity that every tradition has cultivated and that the digital economy has undermined. The physics confirms that the subjective rate of time is determined by the information processing capacity of the conscious system. The traditions confirm that the information processing capacity of consciousness is trainable, that attention can be strengthened, presence can be deepened, and the temporal richness of each moment can be restored through specific, practice-based, community-supported methods that have been developed and tested over millennia. The traditions also confirm, and here we must be honest about the speculative nature of the claim, that the acceleration of time is a feature of the age, a sign of a transition, a temporal signature of a civilization that is approaching the limits of its current mode of existence. Whether this transition is the eschaton, the day of judgment, the end of the Kali Yuga, the coming of Maitreya, or the Messianic age, the traditions agree on the pattern: acceleration, compression, crisis, and renewal. The renewal is not guaranteed. The traditions do not promise that the transformation will occur without the participation of the conscious beings who inhabit the age. The transformation requires a response that the traditions describe as the intensification of practice, the deepening of attention, the restoration of the contemplative capacity that the age has degraded. The response is not passive, it is active. It is the deliberate, sustained, courageous choice to pay attention in an age that is designed to prevent it. And the response begins now, not tomorrow, not after you finish scrolling, not when conditions are more favorable, now, in this moment, the moment you are reading these words, because this moment is the only moment you have, and the quality of your attention in this moment determines the quality of your time, not just in this moment, but in every moment that follows. Because each moment of attention generates a temporal landmark that enriches the temporal map and slows the subjective rate of time for every subsequent moment. The acceleration of time is a message. It is the universe telling you, in the only language that the universe speaks, the language of experience, that your attention is your most precious resource, more precious than money, than status, than productivity, than the endless stream of information that the digital economy offers in exchange for the attention it takes. Your attention is your time. Your time is your life, and your life is being consumed moment by moment by a system that has monetized your attention and that profits from the temporal compression that the monetization produces. The contemplative traditions offer the alternative, not an escape from the age, not a retreat into a pre-digital paradise, but a practice, a daily, sustained, community-supported practice of paying attention to the present moment with the full depth and the full seriousness that the moment deserves. The practice does not stop the clock. It does not reverse aging. It does not change the physics. It changes you. It changes the quality of consciousness that you bring to each moment. And by changing the consciousness, it changes the time from the compressed, forgettable, anxiety-driven rush that the modern world produces to the spacious, memorable, deeply satisfying encounter with reality that the contemplative traditions describe as the natural state of a mind that has remembered how to pay attention. The Prophet Muhammad said, "If the day of judgment comes and you have a seedling in your hand, plant it." This is the ultimate response to the acceleration of time. Do not panic, do not despair, do not freeze in the face of the compression. Plant the seedling, be present, pay attention. Do what is in front of you with the full force of your consciousness and let the universe take care of the rest. The time is not running out. The time is being compressed, and the compression is not a punishment. It is an invitation to discover what every contemplative tradition has always known, and what the neuroscience is now confirming. The present moment is infinite. The present moment has always been infinite, and the only thing that ever made it feel short was the failure to be there for it. Be there for it, and time will wait for you. The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who spent a lifetime teaching the practice of present moment awareness, offered a final teaching that serves as the coda for this entire investigation. The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment, to appreciate the peace and beauty that are available now. The acceleration of time has made this miracle harder. The digital economy, the attention fragmentation, the collapse of temporal landmarks, the dopamine depletion, the pandemic monotonity, the sheer relentless speed of modern life, all of these have conspired to make the simple act of walking on the green earth in the present moment with full attention and full appreciation seem almost impossible. But it is not impossible. It has never been impossible. The present moment has not changed. The green earth has not changed. The capacity for attention has not been destroyed. It has been buried beneath layers of distraction that the practices of every contemplative tradition are designed to remove. The miracle is still available. The peace and beauty are still here. And the time that seems to be accelerating is not running out. It is waiting for you to stop, to breathe, to look, and to be fully, completely, unreservedly present for the moment. That is, and has always been, infinite.